Welcome back to Movies TV Mad. You can follow me on Twitter at Movies TV Mad, and a very warm welcome to Tuesday's edition of the DC Universe Daily. Superman has failed to capture the public's imagination since Dick Donner's Superman and since Alfred Goff's and Miles Miller's Smallville. They're two versions of Superman that captured the imagination. In fact, the biggest hot take ever from me would be that Smallville were able to make a DC Universe successful without the $200 million budget per movie that other producers and directors have got. Bryan Singer, Zack Snyder did not capture the imagination, like it or not, because they didn't put enough butts in seats that Alfred Goff and Miles Miller did for Superman. And now it's over to you, James Gunn. You know, Bryan Singer spoke a good game prior to the release of Superman Returns. Zack Snyder spoke a good game prior to the release of Man of Steel, BVS, and etc. They failed to bring in the money, the dough, the butts on seats that Warner Brothers wanted. But for a decade, consistently, Goff and Miller did this with Smallville. Not only did they do a vast, deep, pre-Superman story, but they actually created their own Justice League on the show. A pre-Superman Justice League, a pre-Superman Watchtower. So many wonderful characters. The Legion from the comics, brilliantly done. The JSA, the Justice Society of America, you know, brilliantly done. Cyborg, brilliantly done. Aquaman, brilliantly done. Brilliant. You know, that episode Justice, when you see the pre-Superman Justice League, including teenage Clark Kent, walking together in slow motion. Brilliant. Achievement after achievement after achievement. And it's only Dick Donner, Alfred Goff, and Miles Miller who have ever achieved the heights of doing this. It's interesting to look into why they were able to pay it off. Was it because the era was different? Was it because there was no social media and people didn't look at media the way we look at it today? We analyze it with a fine-tooth comb. We try and find any flaw in everything, then we pick it to pieces and we shit on it. And maybe that's part of the problem. Oh, Superman made that petrol station explode. Imagine the people who died. Imagine the collateral damage. Maybe we're picking at it too deeply, or maybe people have valid points in their criticisms. It wasn't like people were happy that Lex Luthor was Clark Kent's best friend in Smallville at first, until they saw it play out, because audiences were more patient back then. It wasn't like people were happy with Alan Miles for bringing Lois Lane in a pre-Superman story. But as we saw Erica's performances develop and the storytelling between Clark and Lois develop, it was brilliant. So you can change canon if you do it well, as long as it's not fundamental canon. Now, bringing Lois in actually into a pre-Superman story is pretty fundamental. It changes everything. But in a way, you can have a lot of fun with it. And Alan Miles had a lot of fun with it. And this is what they did. They broke canon, but they made it better than it ever was. You know, some people may dispute that claim. So sometimes when you hear people being upset that Snyder did this, Snyder did that, that's not in the comics, that's not in the comics, but it's in a different element. You know, it depends how you break canon. If you break canon but you're still inspirational, I think people will take that on the chin and say, well, you know what? They did well there. So it is interesting to look at why Superman hasn't captured the imagination like he did in 78, like he did from 2001 to 2011 in Smallville. And there's many, many reasons for that. It's not like Clark in Smallville never did dark shit, but it was very well defined. Sometimes he would choose his love for Lana over what he should be doing. But that was under the premise of him being a teenager who was in love. He made mistakes. He played football once and hurt someone by accident. He spends the whole episode feeling bad about that, and his father explaining to him why he never wanted him to play football. That whole thing where Jonathan and Clark had this impasse about Clark playing football is so brilliant. It's so deep. And this is the very essence of how you make Clark Kent an interesting character. Because saying that Superman isn't relatable and turning your back on Superman is very, very lazy thinking. As a creative and as a writer, as a consumer, you can do whatever the fuck you want. It's up to you if you don't find the character relatable and you don't want to consume him. That's your loss. But as a writer, you can't be saying, nah, can't make him relatable. And it's interesting that Snyder first turned up his nose at Man of Steel until he saw the kind of storytelling that David Goyer and Nolan did. Now, I love Man of Steel, you know that, but it was putting Superman in the real world. And this is why it divided audiences. BVS puts Batman in the real world where he kills. That's why it divided audiences. I love both films. They're amazing takes, and in an Elseworld scenario, they're brilliant. But they can't be your main Superman and Batman. Simple as that. That's why it didn't work. And that's why it divided audiences. But Smallville captured the feeling. Smallville aired just after 9/11. And it's interesting that Star Wars A New Hope and Superman the movie from Dick Donner released just after, I think, Nixon left office. People were desperate for an escape. And that's when the magic works. And, I think we're in the same position now. We've had Trump in America. We've had the Tories in the UK. And people are mired by their political views. Everything's about politics. Everything becomes political. Our entertainment, our football, whether we support Gary Lineker or not, and shit like that. Everything is so political. I ain't a political person, but I know what I believe in. I believe if someone's on the fucking floor and they've got their hand up to me, I'm going to help them up. Exactly what my hero Superman would do. Exactly what my hero Sam Beckett from Quantum Leap would do. Yeah, those damn white men are damn kind. Aren't they, extreme left? Anyway, the point being that we need escapism. It isn't a nice world. There's a war in Ukraine. Innocent people are suffering. And, there's not much that we can do about it. So at least make our best characters as great as you can and give us an escape so we can look up to them again. So we can look at a better world that we've created for ourselves. But they have struggled with Superman. There's no question about that. And a lot of people always say to me, you know what? That's because he's your grandfather's and your uncle's superhero. He's a very old superhero. He was created in 1938, but Batman was created in 1939 and, entered the world's mythos in 1939 and is one of the most popular comic book characters today. And there's no question about it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that Superman wears red shorts and tights and an S on his chest and all of that. He's a cool character. All you have to do is balance it. And also, I think when you look at Bryan Singer's and Zack Snyder's take, they are looking at Superman as a god rather than a guy that happens to come from another planet with powers. Do I like Superman being a god? It's interesting because growing up, I didn't see my Superman, Christopher Reeve, as a god. I just saw him as a friend. That's the point. That's what Christopher Reeve said in interviews. I just want him to be a friend. He's a friend. There's not enough friendships, he said. Neighbours don't talk to each other anymore. Everyone locks their windows and doors. It was a very apt statement. And you've got this guy from another planet saying, here, let me help you. And isn't that beautiful, everyone? Wouldn't you embrace and relate to a Superman like that wants to help fellow strangers and wants to do the right thing? I think now, more than ever, that's important. So, growing up, Superman wasn't a god to me. But it's like everything else. Everyone has different interpretations on these iconic characters. If he makes you feel happy for Superman to be a god, Be at peace. It's cool. Don't worry about it. I'm not offended or upset by Superman being a god in some comics or in some media. I think Superman and Lois also has got a lot of fans, and I think that's why it's going to run through season 3, 4, and 5. Because James Gunn, Peter Safran, and Zaslav have seen, actually, it's quite a popular show. That's another one that's kind of got it right. That's actually an interesting show because it's done something extremely brilliant. It's introduced John Kent, a fictional son as well, and they're telling their own defined story. And that's interesting. That's exactly what Smallville did. They told their own story, a pre-Superman story. But when you meet Clark, even though he's a teenager, he's never wore red trunks before or a cape, but he still feels like that character. He's got powers, he's pure of heart, he wants to do the right thing, and he's been brought up by people teaching him to do the right thing. Now, the right thing is a bit of a Pandora's box, isn't it? One person's right thing is another person's wrong thing. But in Smallville, what Clark's being taught isn't debatable. Be kind, be compassionate. Jonathan says something really brilliant to him at one time, running, or is it quitting, is a very difficult habit to drop. That's not debatable. That's something you would teach a kid, not to quit. It's not a good thing to do because basically in the end you end up hiding from the entire world. You don't give anyone a chance, you don't have any hope and any faith. But it was lessons like this in this show, and it made you think, yes, this is Superman. They constantly try to make you think about the times when Clark, Tom Welling, will become Superman. They got it right. Donna got it right for more people that it didn't get it right for. And there's this whole debate today about the Snyderverse and whether Snyder was right, Snyder was wrong. Someone said on Twitter the other day that it proves that Snyder didn't know Batman because Batman was holding a gun in this picture this person put up. He was putting up some propaganda, right? Snyder fans put up propaganda, and so do people who don't like the Snyderverse put up propaganda, and I fight against it all. It's not that Zack Snyder doesn't know Batman. The point is he created his own version of Batman. This is what I do with my fan fiction. I've written so many pages of Dallas, Knots Landing, Dynasty, Superman, Smallville, Lost, 24, my own versions of these characters that were created for me. It's not like I don't like the official versions, I'm just putting my own spin on it. Zack Snyder was doing his own fan fiction. Just like, what's his bloody name now? I forgot. The guy who did The Last Jedi. Rian Johnson, that's it. He put his own spin on Star Wars. The problem was, it was in the middle of a trilogy that was going another way. So that was a nightmare. But Zack had his own vision. So I don't hate what he did with Batman. He showed us a broken Batman that needed someone to make him better and to re-inspire him again and to remember him, to remind him why he put the cape and cowl on from the beginning. And that reminder and that inspiration, of course, is Superman's sacrifice. That's the point. The point of Snyder's Batman isn't that he kills, that the guy is in a bad place and he needs a friend. He needs someone, and that someone is Superman. That is the point that Snyder is trying to make. That's very Superman, and that's very Batman. In the end, Batman regrets everything and feels guilty for Superman's death, and that's why he puts the Justice League together. That's the whole fucking point of what Snyder's trying to do. And misinterpreting that is so wrong. By just talking about Snyder having Batman and Superman killing, it doesn't tell the whole story. He wanted Batman to earn the right to be Batman again. He wanted Superman to earn the right to be the Superman we know and love. People didn't have the patience to sit there and watch a 5-movie arc. That's the problem we have today. We are reactive. That's you, that's me, that's fucking everyone. But ultimately, Snyder was not a popular figure since Watchmen anyway, so nobody was ever going to give Zack, regrettably and tragically, the chance he deserved. But ultimately, what Dick Donner did and Gotham Miller did worked for people. A lot more. because they didn't mess around with the basics. Dick Donner was never going to do that. And I think if we talk about a very specific episode of Smallville, you know, it kind of sums up why Smallville was so successful. Now, it's interesting, when Smallville came out, superheroes weren't the trend they are today. And I don't think as many people were active on social media. They wasn't. Was Twitter even a thing when Smallville came out in 2001? Maybe just, or maybe not yet. I don't think it was actually. So it was a very different world that our Miles were stepping into. For example, a different world to what Bryan Singer was stepping into, a different world to what Zack Snyder was stepping into with Superman. But anyway, they can't help in the era they got there with. So there's a brilliant episode of Smallville called Rosetta, where we get to see a guest starring appearance, not a cameo, by Christopher Reeve. Now, I was very excited to hear that my hero, Christopher Reeve, who played Superman when I was a young man, I looked up to him. That man's performance as Superman kept me from taking my own life. I remember after watching Superman so many times, and I remember the first one, and you know, he's having that romantic interview with Lois Lane on the balcony, and she asks him about his bodily functions or something like that. And he looks at her so deeply like this, like I'm looking at you. And I was just looking into the man's eyes and I think, I don't see an ounce of cynicism in this man's eyes. This man is really wholeheartedly good. Either he was a damn good actor, which Reeve was, by the way, or he was a genuinely good guy. Look what happened to him with his accident. He saved so many lives with his campaigning. He was brilliant. Now, Christopher Reeve was offered so many Superman gigs after he finished being Superman himself, like in animation, like to do voices for animation and things like that, to be in the Lois and Clark television show starring Terry Hatcher and Dean Cain. He didn't really like that take on Superman, so he didn't do it. Smallville was the only time he got involved with Superman again. He had watched the show. He really liked it. He liked the VFX as well. He liked that there was being some money spent on the show. So he came on and he didn't want a lot of money. All he wanted was to do a little ad at the end of the episode, at the end of the credits of the episode, with Tom Welling talking about his stem cell research foundation, about the Christopher Reeve Foundation. And do you remember the little medallion thing where it says go forward with the Superman shield? I still want that. I still haven't got that. I think it's awesome. I'd love to get that. I don't know where I can get it from. Anyone, let me know. So anyway, this is a brilliant episode because in this episode, Clark is sleepwalking. He seems to be flying to places. He wakes up unconscious in a road. Lex Luthor nearly runs him over. He's going to the Kawachi Caves, which is their substitute for the Fortress of Solitude in early Smallville. But Smallville achieved everything. We did get a fortress at the beginning of season 5. And oh boy, was that a great scene when we saw it rising. And so ultimately he's contacted by this Dr. Virgil Swan, who is a pivotal character in the Smallville legacy. He absolutely is part of this Veritas group who knew Clark was coming, or the Traveler was coming, all along. Dr. Virgil Swan was a character especially created for Christopher Reeve. These guys, Gotham Miller, didn't just have him wheeling past Tom Welling as a silly Stan Lee cameo. They actually gave him something so vital and important to do. Now, you've got to remember that Christopher Reeve was extremely ill. Now, I was watching Talkville, the Smallville podcast with the boys, Tom and Michael, and you know, they had Annette O'Toole, who was brilliant. She's the heart of Superman 3. She played Lana Lang in Superman 3. Brilliant actress. Absolutely adore her. She complained that she wasn't able to go and see Christopher Reeve because she said Christopher Reeve was so kind to her on the set and on location on Superman 3. But it was very difficult. Chris was extremely fragile and ill. Chris thought he was stronger than what he was. And I think ultimately he was doing so many things with his directing, writing a book, you know, acting still. He was being considered for Rear Window on ABC. That guy wouldn't stop. So much respect. But you know, it was very difficult. So Annette couldn't go. So you had a director, Greg Beeman, the best director they had, by the way, literally a co-showrunner as well. So they had Greg Beeman, Tom Welling as Clark, me, Christopher Reeve, with a small crew in New York, and that's where they shot it. So it was a very, very delicate shooting process because, as I say, Christopher Reeve had to have certain surroundings. It was very, very difficult. But what impressed the people on Smallville, that Christopher Reeve was doing really long dialogue. Don't forget, the guy was breathing through a straw. He needed to take intervals to breathe through that straw. And he was doing really long dialogue in one take. What a fucking extraordinary individual. And I'm sure you've all seen it. If you're a Superman fan, if you follow me, and you understand me, and you understand my fandom, and you understand what this character means to me, you know, and you've seen Rosetta. And as a Superman fan, you absolutely know why Smallville was so successful. That fucking scene between Tom Welling and Christopher Reeve was so powerful. It had no CGI. It had no huge VFX. It was just two people talking. But it was the passing of the torch from one Superman, a future Superman, to a former Superman. And wasn't it beautiful? The dialogue. Our Miles Gotham Miller, the creators of this wonderful show, really sat there and thought deeply about this, because Superman is an important character to millions of people around the world, everyone. And he may not be a president or a prime minister, but he's a character that's kept us going for years. He's so important. He's so important to so many people, including me. And what Gotham Miller did was sit there and think about what they were going to do with Chris in this role very, very deeply. I watched it once, I watched it twice, I watched it thrice. I watched it so many times. It was such an amazing, emotional episode. But as great as that scene between Clark and Virgil Swan was, Dr. Virgil Swan, aka Tom Welling and Christopher Reeve, it's the next scene. It's the weight the Christopher Reeve scene has on the final scene of the episode. And that's when Clark is in the barn talking to his adopted father, Jonathan Kent, played by the magnificent John Schneider. You will never see a better performance as Jonathan Kent than John Schneider. John believed in this father figure dynamic, and he made it great. He was freaking amazing, and it had so much power. They opened the spaceship. Clark reads a message in Kryptonian because now he can read Kryptonian. And it's a message from Jor-El. And he said he's been sent to Earth to conquer. Now, obviously, we know that Jor-El was testing him with a lot of things to see how he would react. But Clark doesn't know this. He asks his dad, Jonathan Kent, his adopted father, have I been sent here to conquer? Imagine being a teenage boy and finding out you've been sent from another world to conquer. I suppose there's an analogy there, isn't there? With someone being sent from, basically terrorists sending a young boy as a cell to hurt people in another country. Imagine not knowing that before. And what you do with that. And obviously Clark's not doing very well with it. This episode is Tom Welling's greatest performance. And to this point, our Miles Gotham Miller's strongest piece of writing. It was so compelling. And John Schneider fucking nails it. It's fucking beautiful. You are my son. You have been taught the difference between right and wrong. You're not here to conquer. You're here to help people. You're Clark Kent. Now I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember the exact dialogue, but it's fucking beautiful. And gently and lightly, Mark Snow, former X-Files composer, and at that time, Smallville composer, did a delicate, emotional version of John Williams' Superman theme as the episode phases out. As a Superman fan, how can you not embrace that? We all embrace that. And this is what Dick Donner's Our Miles Superman did. It united people instead of dividing them. Today, entertainment divides us. And that's not what entertainment should ever do. We know we're in a shitty era of entertainment when it divides us instead of unites us. And that's not a good thing. And the discourse, people can't have discourse anymore. Oh, you're some white old dude. What do you know? Really? That's your intelligent response to what we're saying or what I'm saying? You're just going to say I'm an old white dude, which means I don't know what I'm talking about and I shouldn't be talking. Is that where we are today? We are in an apocalypse. But when Superman the movie was released and when Smallville was being aired, we weren't in an apocalypse. We weren't transfixed by a million different opinions on a fucking database, aka Twitter, Facebook, or whatever. Life was different. I think, maybe I'm being nostalgic, but I think life was better. This episode of Smallville was so special. It united every Superman fan because it didn't do anything controversial. It brought back most people's to that point. Because don't forget, there was no Cavill then. There wasn't even a Brandon Routh. There wasn't much of a debate. It was everyone's favourite Superman. He was in a wheelchair. He could barely breathe. And the man, for us, without a fee, all he did was literally, he wanted to talk about, he wanted to publicise his Christopher Reeve Foundation. That's all. The only reason, one of the reasons he did Smallville. He did it for us. He loves Superman. In fact, after the show, he would be behind the scenes asking everyone questions about it. And so he was very into it. There wasn't anyone who knew more about Superman than Christopher Reeve. From the moment he got the role, he was utterly special. So when I see some Snyder fans shitting on Christopher Reeve, he would never have shit on you. He would have never have shit on Zack Snyder. Don't talk shit about this man. This man was a pure, beautiful individual. And if it wasn't for him and his performance as Superman, I wouldn't be sitting here today. Maybe after spending 27 minutes with me today, maybe you wish I wasn't inspired by Superman. I don't know. But anyway, Christopher Reeve and Dick Donner and Tom Mankiewicz. Let's not forget Tom Mankiewicz, the guy who rewrote Superman the movie and really put a lot of important things that we see in other Superman live action and in comic books today. And that guy was a genius too. Wow, I don't envy James Gunn. After just me gushing about Superman for nearly half an hour. It's a big responsibility you have, James. A big responsibility. And I hope you pull it off. I do. There's so many different opinions today. But ultimately, the most important thing is, James, that you're making a Superman movie. And for me, there's nothing more exciting than that. When I was a kid, the build-up to a Superman movie, whether it was Superman 3 or Superman 4, obviously before I knew what that film was going to be, it was still exciting in the marketing. Or Superman Returns, that was one of the most exciting times. And Man of Steel was also a very exciting time. As exciting as Superman Returns. So boy, James Gunn has taken a big responsibility. The pressure that James Gunn's under isn't that he's taking over DC Universe and running it with Peter Safran and has that responsibility to make it successful. No, the biggest pressure under James Gunn that he's trying to reignite Superman, because if you reignite Superman and you make him successful, then your DC Universe will also be successful. There's nothing more important to me than imagining critics and fans sitting together and saying, wow, Superman is back after all these years. James Gunn has created a Superman that everybody loves. But this is the problem we're in today. And this is why the job's more difficult for James Gunn or anyone else who isn't Zack Snyder. Because you've got this group of Snyder fans, not all of them, but a group of them, who will be bashing this man over their head for his past indiscretions for the rest of his life. Whatever he does, they'll freeze frame it and say it's shit. And this is where we are today. But ultimately, if he makes a universally loved film, their voices will be drowned out. You know I love Zack. You know I love a majority of his fans. But these people who are about sitting on social media all day, not watching Zack's stuff, but going on and on all day, are not really the type of people I want to associate myself with. So with all the politics going on and all the different sides to DC and Superman fandom, I couldn't give a shit. Because the most important thing is to reignite Superman and DC and make it a place that unites people instead of divides people. Because isn't that really the legacy of Superman? Isn't that the legacy of basically Siegel and Schuster and Donner and Gotham Miller? I think it is. See you again soon. This has been Movies TV Mad. I am Mick, your host with the most. Just ask your girlfriends and your wives. Please like, share, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you never miss this beautiful perfection. And I'll see you again in the next video. Until I see you again, goodbye, au revoir, auf Wiedersehen.